Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Reducing the Time and Effort in Testing S/4HANA Transformations. We are recording this session and will gladly share the recording with you afterwards. Today's webinar will last for approximately 45 minutes with time at the end for questions. You will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing into the pane of the control panel at the side of your screen. So, without further ado, let's get started. I would now like to introduce you to our presenters, Kishan and Simon. So over to you, Kishan.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar. So I'll provide a little bit of background information on myself. So my name is Kishan Maysuria. I'm a principal consultant with Qualitas. I've been with the organisation now coming up to 7.5 years. During my time with the company, I've worked on several SAP engagements, ranging from full implementations, upgrades, and medium type changes. The main focus of my work is mainly test strategy and management of functional testing, but I've also had quite a lot of involvement in automation and test tools.
Great, thanks Kish. So yeah, I'm Simon Evans. I'm SVP for our SAP and Enterprise practice. I'll give you a little bit more information on that before we get into the meat of what Kishan's going to be talking about. I also come from an SAP background, originally a basis consultant many moons ago, before I found my way into the testing world. Just to get us kicked off, I'll give a little bit of background in terms of Qualitas. You may or may not have come across us in the past. We're a pure play testing organisation and we're the largest globally, so all we focus in on is quality assurance. We are global. We have test centres that are located in a number of different locations, and the practice that I'm part of, we operate out of pretty much all of those locations as well. So we have a good global spread within our practice. Within the SAP and Enterprise practice, we've been a partner with SAP for quite a few years now, so since 2007. The reason that we have a dedicated practice is there's a slightly different skill set involved. There's very much heavily focused on business process understanding. We also have people that are certified in SAP and come from an SAP implementation background, and then we cross-train them into the testing world because we need that in-depth knowledge around businesses, how your processes work, what's different within specific industries like utilities, etc. And we've worked very closely with SAP over the years and various SIs, especially where new technologies have been introduced. So given that we're talking about S4, we've already been involved in one of the first global rollouts of S4HANA Fashion, and we're following that up with another couple of customers in that space as well. So testing where things haven't necessarily been tested in real life previously. And that the same goes in the past. We're involved in the first of HANA on Business Suite rollout, the first large one of those, and into some of like the mobile technologies, and we do a lot around the performance tuning space in those areas. Obligatory customer side, we've got lots of customers, a number of different locations. We've worked for quite some time with a number of our customers where we complement what they're doing around the SAP space and their enterprise applications. So when we're talking about SAP, we don't just come in and focus on those SAP platforms. We're looking at your whole enterprise applications that are integrating in and out of SAP that will be sitting at the hub. So when we're talking with customers and when we're engaging, what we're really trying to do is protect your business. So whilst this is technology and whilst we're talking about systems and data, all of these platforms are there to serve your business and give you competitive advantage for your business. And really that's where we're shifting the focus of testing onto. So it's all about managing risk. When we look across your landscapes, they're very complex. You've got lots of integrations. You've got lots of data flowing in and out of lots of different systems. It is at a point where it's impossible to test absolutely everything all of the time every time you're making changes. So we have to manage risk, and that's really what we're focusing in on. How do we maximize quality, but balance that with the time, the speed, and cost of what's needed for a particular project, and giving you that kind of dynamic way of ensuring that you're not introducing any bugs and things like that, but also finding the most efficient way to do that testing. And some of that we use tools to help us narrow in and focus what we're doing. We'll touch on those in a little bit. And obviously using things like automation where we can, analytics to really learn and pinpoint where we've got particular blockers. And a big focus for us is around the performance side and how we tune your systems to get them really humming nicely and smoothly across your enterprise. So S4 is what we're talking about today, and this is the first of our webinars as we build into Sapphire, and we'll be doing some other sessions later on going into more details. I think we've got a little poll that we're going to pop up around where you're at. So typically we're speaking to customers who are either thinking about it, starting to do it, or maybe they're midway through. So really interested in your view of where you're at on the S4 journey. It's a very exciting time for us and our customers, least of all because of the benefits that S4 bring, but also it's a big time of change. I'm sure your SAP systems touch all areas of your business. We've got some stats up here in terms of the worldwide reach of SAP. According to SAP, 76% of it hits worldwide transactions hit an SAP system. So whether you're kind of ordering something from an Apple store or whatever, you're interacting with SAP. Now the challenge that you have and our customers have is, as far as S4 goes, that's fantastic, but it's that end of life support for ECC 6 as well, which is only 6 years away. And a lot of the programs that we're looking at with our customers are multi-year programs. And typically we're seeing 12 months would be a very fast time to transition onto S4. And certainly if you've got different companies within your groups, different countries and regions, then we're seeing multi-year rollouts for S4. So when we're looking at 2025, it's scarily close. There's a lot of talk, and there has been historically, around the amount of time people spend on testing. There's various reports and studies that are out there, but typically it's around 25%. And actually sometimes we see organisations that are spending as much as 50% when they're doing these large-scale projects. And for us, that's unacceptable. And really what our goal is to reduce that time, reduce that effort as low as we can. And we've got examples where we can get down to less than 15% and sort of 12, 11% type of territory, but increase the quality that's going out there, so you're reducing the risks that you're carrying. And what we'll touch on today is how we're tackling that. And what I'll do now is hand to Kish to take us into the detail around S4 and what we're doing in the testing space.
Thanks very much, Simon. So, SAP have invested heavily in defining comprehensive methodology to assist customers through the S4 implementation process. The actual path that customers take through the methodology is determined by something that SAP have defined as a journey. SAP have created 3 distinct journey types to assist customers depending on their current state of applications and the solution they'd like to implement. The specified journey essentially helps customers from their various starting points, be it on an SAP solution or a non-SAP solution, and plan their rollout to S4, and that's be it on-premise or hosted. Now the 3 specific journeys that exist are a new implementation, which is generally aimed towards customers on a non-SAP system that are moving on to S4 HANA on a premise or cloud-hosted solution, but it also relates to customers who have SAP systems at the minute and want to move to a cloud-hosted solution. The system conversion generally applies to customers where they have an SAP system already in place and they want to move to an S4 instance that's generally hosted, or it's not hosted but on-premise. And then the last type of journey, which is the landscape transformation, is really targeted towards those customers who have a more complex environment, where they may have several SAP instances and they're looking to consolidate those into a single instance, be it on-premise or cloud hosted. Now, the thing to remember is no matter which one of these journeys a customer is on, everyone needs to be mindful that there is inherent risk here of disruption to a customer's business, and that the implementation may not go as planned. Now, we don't have to look too far, and if you look into recent times in the press, we've seen various stories surfacing about the likes of Haribo and Lidl, who have gone through very expensive SAP type failures, where the implementation has not gone to plan, and then they've had to subsequently abandon the project. Now, what we intend to go through today is our testing experiences of S4HANA and considerations to help de-risk your journey. So, I think a good starting point for us is to look back at history, right? So what does history tell us? For some of us, it's not going to be the first time that we're taking on an SAP type implementation. A lot of us would have gone through this already when we made the move from SAP R3 into ECC6. So a good starting point when thinking about your journey to S4 is to take those observations and challenges that were encountered the last time around and think about how we're going to address them this time. So what we found is that people often forget how demanding the previous implementation process was. Looking back, SAP implementations and upgrades can be said to have suffered from similar challenges across multiple clients. So in our experience, what we found was that implementations previously were highly disruptive to the business and demanded quite a lot of time in terms of effort and training. Most had an element of overrun. Now, this was a sliding scale where some had more than others, but in general, most had an element of overrun. Many customers spent a lot of time deciding which upgrade strategy to use, and then lost further time debating or shifting between strategies. Testing was always heavy, and in some cases accounted for half the overall effort on the project. Third-party systems and connectivity, as well as compatibility, was never easy and took extended periods of time to get right. This was coupled with poor third-party vendor engagement and also support. Business involvement throughout the engagement was also often poor. What we found is that although the business were engaged very early on in the process for defining requirements, they would have limited engagement throughout the rest of the project and then only be re-engaged at the point of UAT and training. This would cause various issues in terms of sign-up for the solution and often finding that what was developed didn't meet business needs. Another issue that was found was, or another challenge that they had, was parallel projects and run dual maintenance of two systems. Teams would often be split across multiple activities and not fully comprehend the process of change freeze and how to effectively manage change. Many engagements suffered from unforeseen technical challenges, as well as several instances had a high degree of failures and issues post-go-live. So I'm not quite sure of what your specific experience was, but these are just general observations that were taken away from various support type engagements that we had and conversations with clients over the years. So,
Sarah, can you just pop up the next poll for us, please?
So, focusing on testing now, why was testing such a large part of their overall testing effort? In most cases, testing was not managed and structured in the right way. It's not just about planning once at the very beginning of the project. Planning has to be dynamic and a living process that is updated alongside the project. What we found on previous engagements was that there wasn't enough time allocated to properly planning and preparing testing in an effective way. There was an inherent failure in understanding what was important and testing what mattered to the business. Ultimately, failure to understand the fundamental business processes, together with associated priority and risk, resulted in a general blanket type approach to testing, where organisations would prepare and attempt to run a massive amount of tests, which, to be fair, were often unmanageable within the constraints of the time and resources available. Recently, we've worked with a UK retailer on a similar situation where, when we engaged, they planned to run about 1,500 test scenarios for an implementation that they were working on. Using one of our scoping tools, which is known as the test predictor, we'll come on to a bit more detail on that a bit later, we were able to help redefine the scope for this customer and identify a prioritized set of 350 scenarios. So now that's a massive saving. We went from 1,500 scenarios down to 350. And what this enabled us to do was to help the customer to focus the testing effort, right? And focus on areas of risk, saving them time, money, and effort. So in terms of back to history and looking at why testing was a large part of their overall effort, the other thing that projects didn't do too effectively was essentially identifying and using the right composition of test team. Many test teams consist of testers who are unfamiliar to SAP, and subsequently they took longer to test than anticipated, but also required heavy support from subject matter experts and SAP professionals delivering other elements on the project. What this did is it had a knock-on effect, taking valuable time away from key tasks outside of test, subsequently causing unnecessary delays. So, a lot of the stuff that we saw was, quite similar in the sense that they were deploying teams that weren't fit for the task, didn't have the knowledge or the understanding of SAP, and weren't able to piece it all together. So, that's history. But what's different with S4HANA, and how have SAP tried to address some of the previous challenges? So, SAP have had time to reflect on previous implementations and have invested quite heavily to try and resolve the main challenges observed during the implementation and upgrade to ECC6. SAP have updated several elements of both the implementation methodology and underlying solution to make the path to S4 easier for customers. In essence, the overall methodology has been overhauled and made simpler. So there are now distinct journeys to guide customers through their own implementations, rather than a one-size-fits-all type approach, where customers during the ECC era were left feeling confused about what to do and which elements of the solution related to their instance. The methodology has shifted to support an agile type development, introducing best practice and new activation process. This allows overall effort to be broken down more effectively. Customers to test early, the process of making changes easier, and the ability to deploy a working solution over multiple phases. SAP now also provides standard out-of-the-box process diagrams and test scripts to aid the requirements capturing, testing, and training processes. We'll talk a little bit more about these further in the webinar. In addition, among others, there are now also several resources that SAP have made available to aid the migration and planning processes. So examples of those are things like the simplification list, which is a comprehensive document that covers the entire scope of ERP, and what it enables customers to do is assess functional gaps within their current solution. So moving from their current solution to S4, understand what the functional gaps are. They also have something called the maintenance planner, which essentially analyzes the current environment that a client is on, and it works out, moving to S4, which of those elements are not going to be supported and require changing. So they've done a lot over the last couple of years to try and address some of the issues that they saw the last time around, to make this whole process of moving to S4 smoother than previously with ECC6.
And that's all accessible for customers, isn't it, Kish?
Yeah. So essentially all the out-of-the-box process diagrams and system tests are all available on the SAP portal for customers to download.
Great.
Okay, so moving on to our experience of working with S4 implementations. Well, Out-of-the-box test scripts, which we mentioned earlier, from SAP provide you with a good starting point, right? But what we found is that they require an element of customization. Though good from a system testing perspective, most will not reflect end-to-end process flows. That would form the focus of SIT and UAT. There will be a need to allocate some time to ensure that test assets match your solution. Furthermore, the scripts will reference processing through Fury. Now, we've come across a couple of instances where customers have decided not to use Fury or potentially take a different route, or potentially carry on using SAP GUI. So even for system testing, there may have to be considerations for updating and managing those scripts to make them effective. Another consideration is that there have been fundamental design changes between what was ECC6 and now what is S4HANA. Where previous elements such as customers and vendors used to be configured with set transactions, they're now managed through business partners. So previously, around vendors and customers, they were all set up using particular transactions, but now what they're saying is that everything needs to go through business partners. So this is quite a fundamental change to how SAP works and how customers might understand the solution to work. There are also instances where the SAP GUI transactions no longer exist. So I know this is particularly the case in the financial area, and customers are now being prompted to go through the Fury app to work with that functionality. So it's something to look out for, and it's something that's caught a couple of customers off guard because they need to go back and make considerations for training, etc. So interfaces and third-party applications still pose a major risk to implementations. Third parties need to be engaged early and fully consulted and included within the testing of interfaces. So on a recent engagement with a manufacturing organisation in the UK, we found that certain scanning tools were actually incompatible with S4 and needed upgrading before they were able to communicate with S4. So by engaging with third parties early and using the tools, the analysis tools that SAP have provided will help you draw out these incompatibility issues early on in the process. With phased implementations, the dual running of ECC6 and S4HANA, there continues to be maintenance considerations across multiple systems. As customers implement S4HANA, the business continues to evolve and move forward. It's vital that soft and hard freezes are implemented effectively to avoid having to make unnecessary changes across multiple systems. So, this whole movement of S4HANA moving to a phase type or agile type process needs to be carefully balanced with how an organization needs to run dual tracks. And that's something that we found caused a couple of issues for customers and needs to be thought about. So, further observations. So we found that many of our customers are opting to de-risk implementations by splitting developments of the solution over multiple phases, right? So this is a good approach, and it allows customers to implement parts of the solution which represent lower risk to the business to gain confidence ahead of tackling the more crucial elements. Yeah. Again, taking this approach, if they hit problems, if they hit issues, then at least it's on an area of the business that's going to have less impact on the day-to-day activities. So that's something that customers are actively doing to help with the implementation process. So the other thing is performance testing is still required. So a lot of people think that S4HANA, albeit it's a lot faster, it uses in-memory processing, you're not going to have performance requirements. But that's not really accurate, right? New code considerations, integrated systems, every large platform will always need an element of tuning, right? In order to maximize the investment in S4 and really benefit from performance uplift, what we found is that a lot of customers who have gone through the S4 journey have stipulated in lessons learned that they should have given more consideration to performance. We've recently been through a testing process with a customer whereby we identified a bottleneck within the feed of their sales information from stores and their website into S4HANA. What we found is that the actual mechanism used to receive orders into S4 wasn't suitable for the amount of volume that they were anticipating, especially during their peak periods. And what we found is that it created quite a large backlog that had a subsequent impact on how orders from their website, from their stores were being processed, affecting their time for deliveries, etc. So by us highlighting this, what it resulted in is a significant upstream development within the middleware to manage the flow of data back into S4HANA. Had that made it through to a live instance, what we would have found is that during their peak trading, or even outside of their peak trading, a lot of customers would have failed to receive their goods within the promised timeframes. So the other consideration, S1 has made some fundamental changes to the underlying table structures. What we found is that certain tables, mainly within the finance space, no longer exist and are being recreated. So when thinking about migrating from an existing SAP instance, it's vital to have or to pay some consideration to data transformation and factor that into your testing. So, change control. Change control continues to be a hot topic. Even with the shift to an agile and potentially phased methodology, the process of change control is pertinent as ever. We found that changes need to be managed and controlled effectively, as in proper change control. Without proper change control, you can have phases within your agile methodology overrunning, which will ultimately affect your schedules. Yeah. So, despite best practice efforts from SAP, you need to consider the fact that every solution is unique, and subsequently development or redesign and custom code developed. These developments, together with the interface, will need to be understood in detail and given high priority in testing in relation to criticality of business processes. So, albeit S4 is moving to a more standardized approach where they're bringing out the box, out the box process flows, we have to remember that every single business is unique and there will be an element of customization.
Great, so what we're going to do now is just have a look at a customer example. This is obviously a stylized plan, but it's a real customer that we've been working with, and they had a bit of a challenge. So this was the first phase of a global rollout. So this was tackling one of their countries. It was the first one. And as ever, the challenge of how long things are taking was presenting itself for them. So when we started talking with them, we engaged, and their challenge to us was, how do we reduce the timelines by 3 months? Testing is taking a huge proportion of this particular rollout. How do we reduce that down? How do we streamline it? So we look at a few different areas. Some of it is around optimizing the planning, and we'll go into the detail of this. So optimizing that planning, but also making it dynamic, which is key. So we all have lived through lots and lots of projects. We all know that projects stumble and are challenged for a variety of different reasons. With testing being towards the back, it's quite often squeezed and pushed, and we still want to hit those same dates. So with that in mind, let's build a plan that enables us to actually do that and adjust and be nimble as we go through that process. Kish talked about the right skills, but it's right skills at the right time, how we focus in on those areas, and building that risk profile so we can make sensible decisions as we go through it. But a key bit for me is also the tools that we use to accelerate that testing process. How do we know what to test? How do we get the test assets together if you don't already have libraries of scripts ready to go? And then what do we do with all that data that we're gathering as we go through that process? So Kish, do you want to just take us through what we did with this plan to meet that challenge?
Yeah, sure. So let's take a look at the plan in more detail. In essence, the plan provided is not hugely dissimilar to those that we've seen in the past from other customers. However, this customer is quite keen to understand key risks and explore options of how we could accelerate their deployment while also maintaining the quality of their solution and taking into account the consideration of cost. Now, on initial review of the plan, we quickly called out several considerations. So the first consideration was around the fact that there was no details around the development. So the plan that we've got now is a subsequent plan that the client provided once we've asked that information. We found that there was no, on the original plan, there was no time allocated for planning for or preparation of test activities. We also found that there was a high degree of redundant or low value test activities, such as rerunning of all testing or rerunning of all tests between cycles. There was also quite an extended timeline for UAT. The timelines for UAT were set at 2 months. When we went back to the client, they said that this was mainly historic in nature, and this was linked to the fact that the business had a low level of confidence in IT, and that they'd had previous engagements where they'd seen a high level of failures. So they were trying to bolster on some testing at the end just to make sure that they weren't seeing anything coming through to production. With regards to the plan, there was also some crucial considerations that were missed. So in a sense of there was no performance testing or also no operational acceptance testing, which we flagged in the first instance, just to give them a heads up in terms of things that they need to be considering. So having fed back the initial comments and receiving the implementation details, we were able to work on dissecting the plan into its key components and exploring options to optimize the effort. Using the details of the solution, we were able to understand the implementation, where failures are likely to be, and apply a common sense approach to streamlining the effort. Now, on the original plan, although the customer was quite keen to get testing started early, we felt that time was better spent initially planning and defining a test approach. This would help structure the overall effort, reduce duplication between phases, and also align the project teams, subsequently giving them a saving. Ultimately, our ability to streamline the plan and effort mainly spans from our knowledge and experience of projects and testing. We know that having the correct team deployed is key to accelerating any engagement. Our team consists of SAP certified consultants who understand business processes. This helps to bridge the gap between the technicalities of the solution and also the needs of the business. This ultimately, together with our various tools, pre-packaged scripts, content, the document accelerators that we have, enable us to define and prepare testing activities at pace. So, looking at the overall plan, understanding the developments and how they're going to be coming through, deploying the right team gets us set up in the right way so that we can then offer the customer the ability to accelerate their plan.
So we've touched on accelerators and tools a little bit, and I now just want to take you through these, because these are the things that really make a difference to your implementations. And we kind of break them down into these three areas, anticipating, accelerating, and analysing. Because of the size of your organisations and the complexity and all the integrations, as Kishan mentioned, you end up in the sort of thousands of end-to-end scenarios, lots of different variants. It's all very, very complex. And we need to be able to test in a focused, targeted way. We have an in-house product that's developed called Test Predictor. It's driven by an AI engine, uses lots and lots of different data sources to help us pinpoint exactly what to test, where are issues going to be, and also things like how do we sequence the testing. So we start with the big, nasty, high-impact things first, and make sure that the quality around that is good, because they will have downstream implications for all the other tests. And although that's the most common sense, obvious thing that I could probably say, almost every engagement that we see won't take that approach, and they'll get the quick things, they'll tick the boxes, get a load of testing done, fantastic, we're on track, and then it'll be the big showstoppers towards the end that really cause the biggest impact, because then suddenly you don't have time to get things fixed, and etc., etc. I'm sure you've all seen that. So with Test Predictor, we tap into all sorts of data sources. We look at obviously your business processes. We look at the business impact if things go wrong. We look at the technical risk based on the solution that you're going with, and obviously the customizations that you're doing being a key part of that. Integrations. We'll suck information out of some of your support desk systems as well, so that we can look at where historically you've had issues and start to analyse that and make predictions around whether we think the same thing's going to happen this time round. And also where you've got test assets, looking at those, even though they may not be appropriate for S4, they'll need customizing for S4. We can analyse those and all the tests that you've done historically to really pinpoint what testing should be. And a key piece of that is it's not a one-off activity. So it's not a, let's do the planning, this is what our scope should be. As your project moves and changes and timelines get compressed, we can rerun this information and use it to manage the level of risk that you're prepared to take as you go through that process, which is quite key. And then even once you're live, it's there for any changes that you're making, etc. So it's a dynamic, living, breathing piece. Our testing cloud, so we have a testing cloud where we provide and we can host test tools. We can stand things up, say, for performance testing, so we've got injectors geographically placed in different countries, really there to provide you with a flexible way of managing all of your testing needs. Hosting test management tools, for example, and we have a number of templates and assets that we can just drop straight in, sort of best practice for SAP implementations to give you a flying start. We have a raft of accelerators. There's a couple of key ones to sort of pull out. Some around business models and understanding you as an organisation. So whilst there are very personal things to your organisations that we would need to understand, we have all of the core processes mapped out across different industry sectors so that we can very quickly get up to speed. And again, because of the skills of people that we have and their knowledge around SAP and business process, we can work very collaboratively with your SI, we can be collaborative with your process owners and very quickly extract information out so that once we have that, we're up and running and we don't need to constantly go back and ask them questions and get them to show us how to do very basic things. And fundamentally that will show us the data model that we need to start working with, and we can align your plans around any data transformation activities with the testing activity that needs to go on. We've got a lot of pre-packaged assets that we bring along as well, and this is one of the big accelerators for us. Manual tests as well as automated tests within these bundles in different file formats as well, so whether it's Excel that you're wanting to use or whether it's part of a test management suite such as ALM, we have all this content prepared. There are some customizations obviously that need to be done where you are customizing and you've got slightly different processes or variants, but this gives us an absolute flying start with what needs to be done, and we can focus on the complex bits such as how we're managing data. From an analysis perspective, performance, Kishan mentioned, is key, and we're seeing that it's, as ever, not getting included until the last minute. Again, we have assets and things that we bring as part of that, but most importantly, when we get into the actual testing and tuning, we've got a framework to support that. So we will work collaboratively with your technical teams, again with your SI if you've got one in there, and also with SAP from a performance tuning perspective to really identify where those bottlenecks are and make sure that you're set up for success, not just for go live but beyond as well for any of your growth projections or peak trading periods. And then the final bit just to highlight is around analytics. We're very keen on looking at the data that testing can provide, and I don't mean testing status, how many tests have we run, pass, fail, that's all valid to a degree, but there's a lot of information that's coming through that allows us to see the overall health of your projects and programs. where are the bottlenecks that are slowing things down? Is it with a specific team? Is it a specific phase? Are we finding the sort of defects in the relevant phases that we should be? Using all of this information to start shifting left. So if you're doing a multi-phase rollout, that's great. We can use this information to really start to streamline what testing is happening and prevent quality issues from occurring. And ideally, we're finding fewer defects because those defects aren't there. And that rolls on again into beyond go live and just your overall BAU and testing programs that happen.
Okay, that's what I was on. So, bearing in mind the combination of all the different activities we talk about in terms of us doing our planning element, the composition of our team, and the various accelerators and tools that we have in our kit bag that Simon just talked about, what did this all result in for the client? So, what enabled us to do is actually save the client a total of 3.5 months off their original plan. So, in terms of their challenge that they set us, they said save us 3. We were able to better that by half a month. And the way in which we did that, I'll just walk you through now. So in a sense of what we did was, like I said, we asked for the development detail. And from the development detail, we started breaking down the plan and working through the various elements. So in turn, we looked at various different things. So we started off with ST. So that was the big one that we looked at in detail first. So what we considered was once we had the development detail, we were quite quickly able to see that in the original plan, the client were actually waiting until the end of all the configuration and most part of the development before they started system tests. And what we were able to do is actually shift that system testing effort to the left by 2 months, because we identified that there were certain elements of the solution, be it budgeting and procurement, that were actually going to be ready from as early as April, but then they were going to be waiting an additional 2 months for the rest of the functionality before they started testing. So we worked with them to actually move their testing to the left and start the testing process early. That in itself saved us about 2 months off their original plan. Following the review of the system test phase, what we did is we focused our efforts on the next phase of testing, which was system integration. Now, initially, what we did was using our test predictor, we worked with the clients to refine a test scope that was better suited to what they were doing. So rather than taking that age-old approach of, yeah, we think we've got the right testing scope and let's test everything, and not understanding the actual value behind those tests that you're running, we worked with the client using their various bits of information that they had to redefine their scope and really focus it on what actually matters to them. What we were able to do is come up with a prioritized set of business processes that were quicker to run and easier to maintain for them. We coupled this with certain approach changes as well, in the sense that we removed redundant testing cycles from SIT. So, they had this process set up whereby they were running a full cycle of testing, followed by fixes, followed by another full cycle of testing, followed by fixes again. And what we identified was that, do you really need to rerun all those tests? A better approach would be moving on to a more targeted regression type approach. So this is something they took on. In addition to this, we also looked at ways in which they were actually managing their fixes. So rather than running the cycle and then having a dedicated fix cycle, what we introduced the concept of is having a continuous test fix way of working. And what that enabled us to do is to continue testing throughout the whole process and effectively get more testing done. So by taking into account the redefinition of the scope using the test predictor and also the replanning in terms of how we run that phase, we actually managed to save the customer a further 6 weeks on their plan. Once we looked at SIT, we changed our focus then to look at UAT. Now, as we discussed earlier, UAT was quite lengthy and quite demanding, so initially they had 2 months allocated to the plan. Using our test predictor and working on business processes that reflect their main flows and their main areas of risk, we were able to propose a scope of UAT that was far less in terms of overall effort and requirements from the business than what was originally imagined, right? So we enabled them to focus their testing effort and do it quicker as part of UAT. In addition to that, we also recommended a couple of changes on the approach level to have the business getting involved slightly sooner towards the end of SIT to review evidence and results that are coming out of SIT, just to kind of build confidence. So that way they weren't as caught up about having such a large amount of time for SIT. So the amount of saving, so us having that approach with UAT and working with the business allowed us to actually reduce UAT down to 4 weeks from what was essentially 8 weeks. Now, the relative saving that we made across replanning ST or system test, the changes that we made to system integration and UAT, it gave us enough movement in the plan to actually add in those 2 different test phases that the customer actually omitted from the original plan. So we were able to add back in performance testing and OAT with actually not increasing the timelines or the actual effort. Or the effort went up, but in terms of the overall timeline, we still managed to save the customer 3.5 months. So, in addition to helping customers get over the line with testing for a particular engagement, we also work with them to set them up for the future. So, our test predictor helps to identify test processes as candidates for automation. As part of the S4 program, we can assist our customers with developing a core automated test pack that can enable customers to prepare for continuous development and frequent updates that we pass through from SAP and partners. Now, what we found is most organizations already struggle with current testing demands. The ability to test at pace and at short notice is getting more and more, it's becoming more and more of a feature, right? Unless customers start investing in hiring large test teams, automation is probably only the way forward in the sense of meeting these demands and being able to test at short notice. The fact that when we're going through this when we're going through the implementation and testing of S4, we're enabling customers to make that transition to the automation framework that they need to continue with their continuous development requirements.
Great. I'll just add a couple of things there, Kish, as well. So one of the big challenges we're seeing out there is more and more of your systems are managed out in the cloud. Within the SAP suite, you've got the likes of SuccessFactors, Ariba, etc., and there's obviously non-SAP ones, Salesforce, you name it. One of the challenges that we're seeing there is the changes that are coming through from those applications are managed by your software vendor, and those changes will be made to you. You're obviously given the dates, but a lot of assumptions from very large companies that we work with were, well, we'll be able to dictate the timeline, and actually they found they weren't able to dictate the timeline, and even worse, the Ariba team aren't necessarily aligned up with the SuccessFactors team, so those changes are happening at different times. And even though those changes are tested by the software vendors, there are specific customizations that you'll have and specific integrations that you will have that only you can test. So suddenly we're finding that the testing effort is going through the roof. So automation is key. Not all organizations, or very few organizations within the SAP and enterprise space, have really cracked the sort of full automation covering their business processes, and that is what we're building as part of our engagements with S4. So we want to make sure that you are future-proof. We get you across the line as far as transitioning and transforming your business onto S4, but that you have the right assets in place so that as you transition into BAU and going forwards, testing is fast and dynamic, with the test predictor that we keep mentioning, and also with the automation packs that then support the testing that's there. So with that, we'll wrap up. We are at Sapphire next week, so if any of you happen to be at Sapphire, we'd love to see you. We're at booth 2441, and we've got demos and all sorts of things that we can take you through to show you the meat behind the things that we've been talking about today. So please come along if you happen to be attending. But with that, we'll move on to some questions.
Okay, thank you Simon and Kishan for an informative presentation. We've just enough time to squeeze in some questions, and I've chosen 3 from a selection here, so thanks everyone for submitting those. Right, question number 1, where do you see the most defects, issues coming from?
Do you want to answer that, Kish, or do you want me to?
Yeah, happy to take that on. So, I mean, in terms of defects from S4HANA, I think they seem to cluster around interfaces and customizations. So in our experience and working with clients, we've seen a lot of problems around the interfacing S4 into other systems. Mainly with regards to we've seen certain performance issues that we've talked about earlier, but also just compatibility type issues as well. So, certain versions of scanning tools, etc., just not working with S4. So I would say the main area of focus is probably around interfaces.
Great.
Okay, question 2 here. Do your test scripts cover non-standard S4 scenarios?
Do they cover non-standard S4 scenarios? So the test scripts cover the end-to-end processes where you have your own customizations. Obviously, we can't predict exactly what you're doing, but we have libraries of scenarios that have been customized, so we can draw on those. But typically, we'll only be updating a small percentage where you've got those customizations. So we get the big acceleration from the scenarios that we've got, and then we'll make the tweaks that we need to, but it tends to be a pretty quick process.
The other thing that's quite good as well about the test scenarios that we have is that they're end-to-end in nature as well. So albeit we've got the lower level system tests, we've also catered for the end-to-end processes in terms of how all these individual transactions and processes come together to form an actual business process.
Yeah, and they cater for Fiori as well as SAP GUI as well. So we've got different flavors of them.
Okay, final question, because we're short on time now. Does Test Predictor give me the tests we need to run, and what information does it need to do this?
Okay, I'll try and give the short answer. So yes, it does tell us the test that we need to run, and it looks at it from a business perspective. So how do we manage the risk to your business, as well as technically what's changing and where we need to focus in on, like Kish mentioned, integration points. We pull from a number of different sources, and again, different data sets are available in different customers, so it's flexible. We can plug all sorts of things into it, but typically we'll be looking at what your business processes are, what your technical implementation is, so where you've got standard S4 versus your so you've got your standard activations versus the customizations that you're doing. We'll plug in support desk information, test information, you name it, whatever we can get hold of, we'll feed it in and use that to refine the model. And then we work with you in terms of your risk levels. So different industry sectors will have different risk levels, and we can work and define something that you and the business are comfortable with. And as I said, that's dynamic. So if we need to change tack as we go through, then obviously we can do.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, well, we've come to the end of our webinar now. Thank you very much again to our presenters, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope you can join us again soon. Goodbye.